You're asking the right questions until we get the right answers from the Nairobi County government. Now, away from that, and I'd like us now to shift our focus to a top story this morning, where State House Nairobi will today play host to Jubilee Party members, and of course that is members of Parliament, to try and whip them to support President Uhuru Kenyatta's recommendations on the controversial VAT levy on petroleum products. ODM is also expected to hold its parliamentary group meeting today. This even as the voice of dissent from the president's party over the proposals to have the tax reduced from 16% to 8% continues to grow, with a section of the opponents saying Kenyans are already overtaxed. Just how will this play out during the special sitting that is supposed to happen today in the afternoon at 2:30 p.m. and of course tomorrow, or on Thursday at 9:30 a.m. and at 2:30 p.m. And so this morning in our studio, I'd like us to have that conversation with Justice Bigambo, the governance expert, concerning this controversial Finance Bill 2018. And Mr. Bigambo, it is a division. There's a split that's already playing in the public domain amongst Jubilee and ODM members of Parliament. So will it be easy for both party leaders, that is Raila Odinga for ODM and President Uhuru Kenyatta for Jubilee, to try and whip their party members to support the proposals by the president? Thank you, Brenda.
There are a multiplicity of issues that need to be reflected on that matter. Nonetheless, the question that you pose brings to the fore certain critical issues, one, political issues, and other underlying economic issues that necessitate this kind of debate in this country, such as now. When it comes to the matter of the ability of the president to whip his party members to support his proposals, and his counterpart on the other side, Raila Odinga, also to whip his party members to follow the same line and support the president's proposal, it comes down to political issues. One, remember that it's just about a year after election, and most of these party members are indebted to their parties and party leaders on their successes to go to Parliament as representatives, whether at the Senate or at the National Assembly. Now, also aware of the kind of politics that is played at the party level, the threats, whether overtly or covertly, and the manner in which most of these members are indebted to their political leadership, some may develop cold feet as the debate gains momentum and the day of the vote comes. What is also important is for the party leaders and the parliamentarians to really discuss with the people, because remember that there's the aspect of public participation. To what extent are these political party leaders and the legislators listening to the voices of the people about the direction that this issue should go? We know very well that whether this issue of 8% is embraced or not, the cost of living is already high and is going to be affected by this. And some members, as we know it today, some politicians, even some who are coming out strongly as negating the proposal of the president, whether they belong to ODM or they belong to Jubilee. Some of them, yes, they are seeking, yes, the necessary publicity as politicians, some of them for the necessity of sound bites that are going down into history. But the question is, to what extent have we ever witnessed a situation where a majority of party members go against or break with party ranks and party leadership and take a position and stand with that position in their numbers? Very few. And also this proposal, the president only needs a simple majority for it to sail through. We are going to see overt and covert lobbying of these members, and by the time Thursday afternoon comes for deliberations and then going to vote, we are likely to see the president's proposal likely carrying the day.
So are you saying, Mr. Bigambo, are you saying that the president's proposals have already passed? It's just a matter of rubber stamping. It's a matter of wait and see for the members of Parliament to rubber stamp.
Well, I wouldn't want to speak too soon about the same. Nonetheless, looking at the political machinations that take place in political parties and how our politics are played, it's difficult for some members to stand their ground to the end, because there are the consequences or the net effect of breaking away from the party ranks, and some of them may really fear those consequences that may come, whether it is presently or even in the foreseeable future. And that is why, in the end, most of them, while they may want to demonstrate to the people that they spoke against an issue or they tried to stand ground, but at the end of it all, it is difficult for members of the Jubilee Party, at the end of these deliberations, to break ranks with their party, to break ranks with the president.
So as we speak right now, it is that you're saying that members of parliament, especially from Jubilee, are just speaking for the sake of just to be seen they're speaking. So it's not like they're torn in between the party leader and the problems that Kenyans face.
No, some of them actually showing or depicting genuine concern, very authentic concern as individuals, and also the genuine concern that they have for their constituents or the people that they represent. Because remember that legislative authority, or when you look at the Constitution as it provides, is derived from the people. And they want to speak in a manner that reflects the wishes, the aspirations of the people. But you know how our politics plays. When it comes to being shepherded by a political party, then in the end, that individual voice, the individual reflections of a particular legislator, which mirrors the aspirations or the will of the people, in the end is subdued by the political currents that blow within a political party structure or within a political party. And that itself is what will affect the decisions that most of these legislators will make when it comes to voting.
Okay. And let's talk about the president's let me call it State of the Nation address on Friday last week when he was talking about the VAT. Was it necessary for him to reduce it to 8% and give the proposals in terms of spending cuts? What would have been the worst thing he would have done by just, signing? You
see, let's face it, where we find ourselves, even right now, even these proposals and how it's going to affect the cost of living, is not something that I believe the president wants. It's not something that even maybe Treasury wants, but it's the kind of direction that we've been pointed to by the Britain institutions, especially the voice of the IMF. When you look at the kind of debt distress that most African countries are having, and the kind of debt relief that they seek from those Bretton Woods institutions, and the debt that they have accrued, and actually also the challenge that most of these African countries have in terms of even just paying the interest to these debts is what pushes these countries to raise revenues for purposes of trying to offset the debts that they owe. When you look, for example, the year 2017 that just ended, how some of the African countries were subdued or, manacled by the chains and the weight of the debt from whether they are bilateral lenders or even just external debt. Look at a country, for example, such as Chad. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. Look at Mozambique. All these countries last year were really choked by debt. And when that came, they yielded to the pressure externally to raise revenues for purposes of trying to offset these debts. And that's where we find ourselves. For example, right now, and it's on record, for example, if Kenya today, as it is bilaterally, owes China close to 70% of bilateral debt, or China actually has granted Kenya, and the other remaining, say 30% or actually 28%, is to the multiplicity of other bilateral debts, it tells you that when you owe so much to a particular lender, who, and some of them today are commercial lenders who are looking for higher profits from this, it puts you in a catch-22 situation. Today, the kind of proposals that we are facing in terms of even raising revenues, it is not that our leadership of our nation willingly wants to do this, but because of the kind of the quagmire of debt that we find ourselves and trying to sustain the kind of and repay the debt that we have. Remember that sustainable development is one of the values of our nation when you look at Article 10, Article 2 of the Constitution. But our development today, when you look at it, is it sustainable? The direction that we're headed into, I think it's going to be a bit unsustainable.
Okay. Let's go back to now the president rejecting the finance bill, the proposal that members of parliament had put to have it implemented in 2020, but it returns it to parliament with several proposals. Let's look at this scenario. assume members of parliament reject the president's proposal. How easy will it be for these members to raise the two-thirds majority, which is 233? Because it means then they'll have to have members of the opposition and members from the Jubilee party.
I have listened to the spoken word by all the legislators from both sides of the divide. I can't say both sides of the divide because now there's no divide. When you listen to what the president has proposed, when you look at what Raila Odinga has spoken on record, or Kalonzo Musyoka, it tells you that the political leadership of the nation seems to be inclined in one direction, that they are supporting the president. And it's only some members that are voicing differently. The thing is this, either way, even if they want to shoot down the proposal of the president, they need the numbers. Now, to what extent is it possible for the renegade members to whip majority of the legislators to stand with them and shoot down the president's proposal? It's a snowball's chance in hell. And that is why when you look at, if you're to juxtapose the chances of the renegade members and the chances of the members in support of the president's proposal, it is possible to see the president's proposal sailing through for political reasons. Because as I talked about the political currents that will have to play within the political system or political parties, it is what will drive these agendas to its success.
Okay. Now, the president makes a proposal of let's have spending cuts. And Parliament and the Senate are also affected, 5 billion cuts. Then we see 6 billion cut on the National Government Constituency Development Fund. Why do you think members of Parliament are strongly opposing these cuts?
Because it affects their delivery, their political delivery, their influence at the grassroots. For example, when you look at the National Government CDF fund, if it's reduced, some of the projects that these parliamentarians or members of the National Assembly, through their CDF kitties, the NG CDF kitties, and the projects that already have been earmarked for certain allocations, etc., are going to be affected so much by such kind of cuts. Which means we may also likely see lots of white elephants at the end of the 5-year period because of the cuts or the drawbacks that will be affected by these spending cuts. And that's why some of them will strongly fight against those cuts. Because in the end, when their projects are unfinished, and some of them also use those funds for political reasons and reward schemes within their constituencies, then their influence also will wane to that extent. So that's why they will try to fight it. But when it comes to trying, to reduce expenditure or spending, there are far too many places that the government could look at.
In fact, I was getting that because members of parliament were saying instead of reducing CDF funds by 6 billion, Senate and National Assembly funds by 5 billion, why don't you go to the executive itself? Because they were questioning why the president expanded the cabinet. We have appointments of CAS, we have the expanded numbers of principal secretaries, and they're like, you need to get rid of all these positions if you want to raise money instead of putting the cuts on this other side.
There is so much opulence that our leaders live, in. Right from the executive, go all the way to the judiciary, the parliament itself, entire legislature. All these guys live in opulence. For example, when our honorable president himself was deputy prime minister and minister for finance, and the proposals, the good proposals that they came with about even the capacity of vehicles that government officials should be driving, what happened between then and even where we are right now? Because when you look at the kind of motor vehicles that are procured by state agencies, by government itself, it actually puts a shame to the kind of proposals that Honorable Kenyatta did, put forth when he was, head of finance. And look, when that happened, we said that it's going to serve the nation or the country this number of billions of shillings annually, and that can be channeled to other development projects. Now, that has been pushed to the backwaters and seems not to make sense. The question is, if government makes policies and those policies die a natural death a few years down the line, then it also tells you about the nature and the sincerity, the authenticity that government itself has when it's making certain policy proposals. Today, moving forward, we need to cut down on those luxuries. the manner in which we transport our leaders. I mean, really, if these are leaders that are adored by the people and they are put into office, you do not need a whole chain of about 20 vehicles to escort you to your home when you're going to sleep or bring you from home when you're going to your office. And then all those vehicles are there, high-capacity vehicles, waiting for you to finish your meetings so that they can take you back home or ferry you to the next meeting. Really, this can be reduced. Having a chase car is not a problem, but you can just have one and then your car, and that's just it. Somebody doesn't need a whole train, a whole chain of support staff and vehicles and chase cars and security personnel who can be deployed to other places to take care of affairs of the nation. The other thing is this. When it comes to also other expenditures, look at the amount of money that each ministry, for example, and each parastatal spends on other, what I may call leisures, flowers and teas and other snacks and whatnot, etc., and allowances. Well, all these areas are areas that, some cuts can be effected. But nobody's looking at that side. So that tells you that the government is not genuine.
In terms of
when
cuts?
When it comes to making cuts.
Okay. Just hold on to that thought. We're talking to Javas Bigambo, a governance expert, concerning this controversial Finance Bill 2018 debate that has been making the headlines for the better part of this month. And of course, we expect both parties, opposition and Jubilee, to have a parliamentary speaking today, just a parliamentary group meeting today, just to try and whip their members to support President Uhuru Kenyatta's proposals. We'll have more of this discussion after the short break that we're taking right now on KTN News Center.